Hi, welcome to the second session of the day, Digital-Led Maintenance. My name is Joe Benitez. I'm the Group MD of the IM Group, and this is a subject that's really close to my heart. I think a lot of people can relate to the shift from analog to digital, not just in the maintenance section, but also in other sectors, which we may talk about later on today. My background is retail. I've been in FM for 5 years. And I am joined by an illustrious panel today of 5 guests who will introduce themselves today. But first of all, on my left, sir.
I'm David Hemming. I'm the Service Delivery Lead for major programmes within NHS Shared Business Services. I come from a client-side background, having been a Director of Estates and Facilities. And specifically, I'm looking at how the next generation of hospitals can be delivered in a smarter way using digital and data.
Hello, my name is Darren Fitz. I'm a principal consultant at a company called Symmetry. We're a global technology provider and supporting the construction sector. And most of my work these days is supporting client organisations with their capital investment projects, i.e. new builds, and also increasingly asset management.
I'm Mike Darby, CEO and co-founder of Demand Logic. My background is building services engineering, so I kind of grubby hands-on maintenance. I specialise in building automation systems. I got quite excited about buildings starting to go digital and then increasingly frustrated about how hard it was to make use of the data that buildings were generating. So Demand Logic is my current company, and that's the problem we set out to tackle.
Good morning, my name is David Meacock. I'm the Group Director of Engineering for MCFT. We service commercial catering across the UK and across the globe. And along with our partner OST, we've developed a service platform to digitise service delivery.
My name is Paul Bullard. I'm Product Director at SFG20, and I've got 25 years experience working in the facilities management software industry.
Well then, Paul, well, seeing as you're the last to talk, I'm going to ask you the first question, if you don't mind, sir. So let's start at the macro level. The macro level is, what is digital-led maintenance?
That's a great question, and I think the reality is it depends who you're talking to. Sometimes when we're working with customers, talking to people in industry, if you're starting at the very beginning, you're looking at design and build, and that could involve a BIM drawing. It could involve that upfront information management that people would consider. If that's then passed down through the chain into the operations, then that's driving your maintenance digitally. You're actually collating that information up front. You're making decisions about how you're going to deliver things, and that's influencing the outcomes as the project goes live. However, on the other hand, you could have the right at the cold face actually with the assets, and are we putting sensors on those assets, and people looking at the sensors driving our behaviour for how we're delivering our maintenance activity. So it really could also be influenced by the systems we're actually using to drive how we're delivering maintenance. That might be a CAFM system, it might be an IWMS, a CMMS, an enterprise asset management product. If that's driving our behaviour, then it's digital-driven maintenance.
Anybody got anything to add?
I think at the fundamental level, it's looking at data and digital tools and platforms and leveraging the opportunities from that to get efficiency and effectiveness in that whole operating and maintenance of the buildings. And that's where it's at. So it's however you use that data and however you leverage it is where digital-led maintenance is at.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that actually. So look, I don't think any of us here would say we're not already doing digital already. You know, a lot of the CAFM systems have been around for over 20 years. We've got sensors, telemetry. I'm sure many of the audience today are actually using mobile devices, cloud systems to have jobs, work orders coming through. But this data is actually increasing all the time. But these are all point solutions. They're all dispersed, all right? They're probably actually held within cost centres. And the real benefits, and I think it's where we're leading maintenance through digital, is actually getting hold of all of that data to give us increased insights. And once we've got a real handle on all that data and that information that everyone's generating all over the place, then that gives us opportunity to start bringing these new technologies. I think there's going to be discussion this afternoon about AI specifically, which is obviously a good thing to look at. And it will move the whole discipline from predominantly being reactive to being predictive through these insights. So for me, it's connected data for the benefit of a whole organisation, not necessarily just those doing maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that as well. Like I think the clue, the key is in the word led. You know, like you say, we've been using digital systems for a long time. I think the thing that was always missing when I was a maintenance engineer was the fact that you're working in buildings that are already generating lots of data, but you don't have time or resource to actually digest all of that data and work out what to do with it, which is, I guess, one of the reasons why we've kind of generally remained stuck to planned preventive maintenance schedules and things like that. You know, and you can say, of course, that a planned preventive maintenance schedule is on a digital platform, but it's not necessarily the thing that's leading you to do the maintenance. The opportunity, I think, is it's almost like catching up with the automotive industry, where you know cars have been telling us for quite some time through telemetry whether they need maintaining or not. So I think you know that is really where we need to catch up. It is a lot harder in buildings. I would definitely defend the industry from that perspective. I googled on the way up actually that there are 37 million Volkswagen Golfs have been built. So iterating that continually on what is essentially the same car is relatively. I'm not denigrating them, but it's relatively easy compared to bespoke in every new building. So we've got to get modular about it, but it's data to lead maintenance. So don't maintain things that don't need maintaining.
And Mike, you kind of launched your business in 2007, so you've probably gone from analog to digital in the last 17 years. I mean, what have you found, and what are the shifts that you've seen that you've had to do in your business to make it work?
That's a really good question. Funnily enough, it's been less about the tech, because buildings have been generating data since the 80s. You know, BMS and the like, it appeared in the 80s. When I was an apprentice, I got really excited about this convergence of, you know, one of my hobbies of writing code coming into the real world, you know, getting bored of writing code to do silly games that no one was playing, to writing code that was operating big machines in the real world. And that I found really exciting. Suddenly exposing things that were previously you could only access with a step ladder and out of hours and taking a ceiling down. Suddenly you could see what was going on. So that was really exciting. But what ended up being increasingly disappointed was what we were doing, what as an industry we were doing that with that information. We're still being reactive, you know, so only going and looking on a BMS when someone's complained about something. So the opportunity really was, how do we analyse that information and get that in front of people before they realise there's a problem? That was the start of our journey. So we started doing this. In terms of the evolution over the years, it's been as much about humans as it has about the digital side of things. When we first started the business, we were kind of generating reports for engineers, and we were aiming at our kind of target market was M&E contractors and FM companies. The problem we had with that was that they didn't have a mandate for change. There was no discretionary budget. It's all already allocated. So we ended up working our way up the property management chain, and so largely at the moment we sell to asset managers, because we had to find who really cares, whose brand depends the most on the performance of this building. So the tech changes that we made were like, how do we get that information at a top level, not in a non-engineering way, so that it means something and can be acted on. So we've ended up scoring buildings. You know, we have simple scores for comfort, for maintenance, and for energy performance. And those three things work harmoniously together. So acting on the insight from the platform, keeping a bit of top-down pressure to make sure you're maintaining your scores, that's where we've seen the real change, the real traction.
And what are the benefits, do you think? So somebody listening in today thinking, what are the benefits of making that shift to digital? What would any of you say are the key benefits to an organisation?
I think first and foremost, it's using data, analysing it, and getting information so you can make informed decisions. Because otherwise, you're making decisions in isolation. You know, if we look at pre-planned maintenance, it's a risk-averse methodology that we maintain everything to our level, irrespective of where it needs it. However, data can now tell us what the level of condition. You go to the automotive industry, your car now tells you it needs a service within 1,000 miles, but actually, after driving 100 miles, maybe on motorways, it suddenly says, no, it's now 500 miles. Mm-hmm. We're not using that, that technology in the built environment the way we should, and we're just going to what we've always done in the past and going to a safe space. But it's getting to the stage we can't afford it anymore.
I think I was picking on that. It's getting that right data to the engineer at the coalface at the right time. If we want to be efficient, we want the guys to act safely and have the tools they need to do. So extracting that data and having it delivered in a way that they can actually use is crucial.
Yeah.
I think there's a trust element there. So if we're talking about shifting the needle, we're talking about digitally led maintenance here. Most people I speak to, when we're talking about the actual data that's available, they tell me it's not believable, it's out of date, or we've got real issues with that. And from my research, around about 80% of asset-owning organisations have got a CAFM system or electronic asset management system in place. So don't forget the other 20% who haven't got even these solutions in place. But when you start looking at the data that's inherent in these systems, I'm only going to describe it as generally poor in many, many cases. Yeah. So to actually move us forward, I think looking at the existing systems we've already got in place, improving the actual data collection and the maintenance of that data is going to be key moving us forward. Because I agree with you 100%. You know, we should be actually working the same way as we're working with our smartphones. You know, we've got amazing all this access to all this information. Why shouldn't maintenance engineers have exactly the same access from the same sort of devices? That's what the world we're trying to get to. Okay, make it very easy for people. But we've got to start moving to a position where it's trusted data that's actually being provided and it's accessible. And I think that's going to be a challenge in a lot of organisations. And again, I'm going to come back to all this wonderful technology coming through, whether it's machine learning, whether it's AI, etc. It's reliant on good quality data, not dirty data and missing data. Yeah. So for me, that's the cultural shift we're going to have to make. And it's happening. I mean, all the clients I'm working with, they've got a real appetite to go on that journey.
And I think this gets even more complicated when you've got a huge range of assets, of legacy assets, some that are not going to be replaced in the short term because they're functional. You know, the cost to replace would not be economical. That you are not collecting data from. You know, against some new assets that you are. So how do you operate where you have data here, but you don't have data there, but you still want to have a complete package?
I think, you know, that means you really need to look at the risk profile that you have, and you know, where is the highest risk to the organisation from a failure of the assets, and whether it's the fabric or the building services, you really have to drill down into where that risk sits. What's your appetite for the risk, and what level of tolerance you can hold for it? Because without that, and without that understanding, where do you target your resource? And I think that's the key issue.
I've got to Joe's original question about the original point about what's the benefit of going to data-led maintenance. I guess you know, I'm fortunate to see this day in, day out, but you know, we have three key impacts, and so saving 20 to 30% of energy and the corresponding carbon is normal, absolutely normal. Improving comfort and therefore productivity of the occupants is also normal. You know, we reduce complaints by typically 50%. That's a real key win for me, because often when you're trying to address energy wastage in a building or poor system performance, you get pushback from key stakeholders in the building who think that by trying to save energy, you're going to upset all the occupants. We're consistently proving the reverse is true. It's just about getting buildings back to how they were designed, make sure key maintenance issues are fixed. And the third key benefit that is the one that's not really being utilised yet, I think, is that you can actually make efficiency savings in your maintenance in the way you deploy human resources.
Absolutely.
It's not just about efficiency savings, though, because you know, when I think back to my maintenance days, like maintaining fan coil units in a building, I can't imagine anybody likes doing that. It's really boring. And you know, 9 times out of 10, you've taken it to pieces to find there's nothing wrong, so you put it back together again. Or you might have put a fault on by mistake because you left a screw out. And I don't think anyone who's feeling under threat, that their job is under threat through digital-led maintenance, I think should really think about it in these terms. It's like, wouldn't you rather be spending your time on things that are actually interesting, that's been drilled out by something that doesn't get bored, you know? So something that's doing the relentless churning through to find those issues for you. I mean, that's same with cars. I mean, I don't like to keep overusing that analogy, but you know, I would imagine there were automotive engineers who feared that their jobs would be under threat. You know, when engine management systems started telling us what's going on. But it's not the case. They're just focused now on fixing things that need fixing.
Yeah.
I think that the overall opportunity, though, is if we start, like we said earlier, right at the beginning, if you're bringing data through from the design phase, actually that's relevant for the maintenance and the operations, that has to be an advantage rather than having to clay it all out and work it all out as you go live with your building. Although we know that most of our buildings, they're not new builds, they're not handovers, they're, okay, we have this building, how do we do things now? So then we're talking about the quality of the data and the actual quality of the asset register. And if we have that as a starting point and we can use these tools to actually better define that data, highlight where the inconsistencies are, and then pass that to our downstream systems which are connected, and they're actually receiving the data in the correct way as opposed to truncating information or the challenge of bringing, in our world, large encyclopedias, PDF type information down to an engineer's mobile. If we're solving that problem, then that's driving that digital journey as well. Mm-hmm. And then actually as that data then flows back and the information we're providing to help us make decisions over the maintenance schedules that we're carrying out. But I mean, you mentioned just now the efficiencies. One of the things I've found hard for people is where we're talking predictive maintenance, mm-hmm. is how do you plan your workforce for a predictive maintenance scenario? It involves a different way of looking at things, a different way of planning. It's very easy to have a calendar and say we're going to do this thing quarterly, we're going to do this annually. We can plan it all together, work out when's most effective. But if that's on a usage basis which is perhaps variable, then we need to use the technology to help drive that as well.
I think, we're very much talking about technology, digital and data, but actually one of the points is the human aspect here. There are some cultural issues that we need to, break down barriers, and it's the silo between the design and construction side and the operation and maintenance side. And you can always see, if you see big estates teams, they always sit in different places,
yeah.
never talk to each other. But the whole issue is, the focus is very different. But if we bring that together and get collaboration, so when we're designing, building, we're actually thinking about the operation and maintenance of it and making decisions at that front end that will impact and looking at the whole life, we can get greater efficiencies. But if you're getting the two teams to talk, that is the key issue. And I think from a cultural point of view, if you can break down those barriers and get the engineers, the maintenance team involved in design early on, so they actually explain what the impact of some of these decisions are.
And that's a lot of the work I'm actually doing with clients currently. So it's much more on the BIM, building information modelling, digital twins sort of agenda. But I'm going to say in the last 2 years, there's been this real shift change that we are bringing, exactly as you're alluding to, is actually bringing those maintenance teams in, those asset management teams in, to have the conversation, talk about soft landings, things like that. All right, look at how we're going to actually maintain, have we got access to the equipment that we actually need, and that includes actually bringing in third-party, FM providers into the discussion. So through building information modelling, what I'm actually finding is a great opportunity to actually test a lot of these processes, bring the data together. But what I'm actually finding is that when we start looking at the BIM processes on new capital investment projects, quite quickly we start the concept, what about legacy data? What about this legacy information? And some of the good principles you can actually apply within building information modelling, you start testing with legacy. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment with a lot of organisations is we look at their existing CAFM systems, electronic asset management systems, and seeing the poor state they're in, and introducing just simple things like classifications like Uniclass, new rules of measurement for costing, and obviously SFG20, all right, will be also in the mix there. And just actually incorporating that into these systems, the great benefits we actually have from that is really good. But if I just take into another tangent, just simple things, we're talking about digitization, and we're talking about cultural change. Just thinking about documentation at the moment, all right, documents. On average, right, people that actually use information, go and have a look at your drawings for your system, and all that sort of thing. On average, there's loads of research out there that people are actually wasting 1.8 hours. You can see it's academics with their 1.8, but 1.8 hours every day just looking for information, not even data, just information. And when they're looking for this information, they're only successful around about 62% of the time. Yeah. So when we're talking about the benefits, just allowing people to actually get to their information, whether it's via emails, reports, document management systems, CAFM systems, get this information data immediately and get it every single time, that's going to be a major shift and change for all of those actually conducting maintenance already within asset management. So sometimes it's a low-hanging fruits where you can really get some benefits when we talk about digital change and digital transformation.
What's interesting, if you look at the positives, I think most people here know the positives and are trying to make that shift. I spoke to a couple of you before today's session who both said that it's not happening quickly enough. We know we need to do it, but we're not doing it quickly enough. What are the drawbacks? Why aren't companies doing it quickly enough?
I think one of the issues is not understanding the value of the technology and the value of the data. Because if you don't understand where you can get that efficiencies and the effectiveness, you can't make an investment appraisal about whether you should suddenly buy into it. So you may get, a visionary, in there that says we should do this. That's one person, but changing the whole of the organisation, getting them to adopt that technology, Roger's adoption of technology curve says you need to get 70% of the people to actually buy into it before you will get that change to happen. And I don't think we've got enough information, or people aren't willing to start looking at how to do things differently. Look at what they've done before, but actually go, there must be better ways out there.
I think there's a vicious circle as well of so if you look at typical maintenance contract in a building, it's been defined in the same way for a long time. Breaking from that, who's taking the risk? Who's deciding who's taking the risk to break the status quo? Now, deciding how much risk that actually is a completely different question. But breaking out of that mould is what I see as the big obstacle. And part of that vicious circle as well is that from a FM company perspective, when they're tendering for maintenance, if it's on a schedule of labour hours, then the only way they're going to win a contract is by saving their margin. Or there's no scope in there for them to introduce their own efficiencies. So if you can do that, if you can break that and start using data-led maintenance, then one, you're using your own human resources more efficiently. They'll be happier. The point that I don't think we've talked about is that there is a skills gap, definitely in building services. There's a pretty glaring one. One of the things that our platform does that we introduced, and part to your original question about what's changed over the years, one of the things we added was that we were trying to draw people into a digital system who were used to working pretty much non-digitally. So we added a kind of chat function on the platform. And that actually slowly migrated and upgraded a little bit into the kind of rudimentary workflow process. But what you see abundantly clear on that is the response to issues. If there's something clearly broken and the machine is highlighting that it's broken, and then an engineer just goes and changes a set point because they think there's a problem. There's a clear misunderstanding about what's going on. If we can get engineers less focused on doing the mundane and more focused on being engineers, because another elephant in the room is a lot of the people working on these systems aren't necessarily an engineer. Be a technician or something like that. Not wishing to denigrate them, I think we should be encouraging people to upskill. I think if we can break that, if we can break the status quo, get everybody agreed that there's a shared vision, that has to be landlords, managing agents, FMs as well, all agree who's going to get the benefits of that. So is it going to be the FM? Is going to save from their own efficiencies, which I think is fair. The more efficient they can be, as long as they can demonstrate that they've delivered a good building and good, safe working environment at the lowest energy impact, then that's the ultimate goal, I think. And whilst we said it's not changing fast enough, it is changing. And I think the last 18 months really starting to see a paradigm shift, I would say, in appetite. Sorry.
I think an issue you do see is who are the decision makers across the estate and what system do you opt for and how can they work together. We work in kitchens. The chef has got huge influence over the equipment, but no thought at all as to how data is collected and operated. And that's just one example, but it'll be the same in different sectors within your estate. So how do you have a system overreaching that you can collect data when you've got different decision makers, all with different views about what system we use and what data comes in? So I think looking forward, you need some sort of a platform that is technology agnostic, but how does that work with different contractors, different FMs, to all sing off the same sheet?
I think some of the other issue is, and it was mentioned earlier, the skills gap that we've got with our current workforce who have historically worked in a very analog way. Technology changes. Keeping up with that technology is always going to be a challenge. And the systems are complex as it is. But one of the challenges, we find from a client's perspective is finding the right workforce, encouraging people in there. And we're not looking at, okay, the younger generations, what are they motivated by? They're digital natives. So if we are still trying to do things in a traditional way, it's not encouraging them to join the whole sector. So actually, we could take an opportunity here to leverage their interest in digital and data, because that's what they've always understood, and start looking at some of the trades, because I think we need to look at different trades for BMS, controls, data, that are actually a part of the FM sector, which we're not looking at the moment, and I think we're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I think, and again, back to my point about all the while that becoming a building services engineer seems to result in you being up a ladder and being shouted at by people in an office, and then mundanely going round and round a load of fangirling. This is not particularly appealing, which might be one of the reasons why there's a skills gap, because I'm not sure that I know anyone who wanted to be a building services engineer when they were at school. Yeah, it kind of tend to fall into it. I misread the advert on that.
Very good.
There's definitely something to do with a bit of disillusionment over the technology as well. If you think 10, 15 years back, when people started talking about bringing in predictive maintenance into an organisation, and everyone ran ahead, built digital teams, they were going to put loads of sensors everywhere. And then they found out to actually do it and do it properly, the systems needed time to learn the steady state behaviour of equipment. They needed to collate that information. If you're going to do it over a wide area, that's lots of data sources. At the time, there was a challenge with cost. Everyone wanted to make a markup. You make a markup on the sensor and then the platform and then your CAFM system, and everyone wanted a piece of it. And I think, like Mike's just said, we've now seen that real shift over the last couple of years where the costs have come down. There is more realism about what can be done. I think the projects that have had real success had a real focus. They haven't tried to be everything for everyone. The IoT, it almost dropped back to that very simple. We started to replace the human as a sensor with technology as the sensor. So we weren't just relying on people to ring the help desk and tell us something had gone wrong. We're having equipment starting to talk to the CAFM systems and actually report those situations.
I think my industry, though, has been guilty of over-promising as well. There are solutions out there that claim you put in a black box and it fixes the building. It's like there's a block strainer. How's the black box going to deal with that? Mm-hmm. The point is, it's like, yeah, we can work much more efficiently, but for our industry to be saying that, don't worry about it, you just plug this in and you can get rid of the maintenance team is absolute nonsense. It's all just about working smarter.
Even Gartner crystallise it. They have their hype cycle for new technologies where the optimism rises up to the peak of inflated expectations and then drops down to the trough of disillusionment and then rises up to somewhere in the middle over time. And I think that's where we are now. We're actually hitting that upturn again into actually what's possible, but more importantly, how this really benefits organisations.
Yeah, there was a study done by FMJ 12 months ago. I think you were involved in it. SFG20 was involved with it, which said that only 1 in 5 companies had adopted digital-led maintenance kind of almost fully. The challenge was, is that possible, or do we need a blended approach? And I suppose the question is, do you think we'll ever get to a stage where analog isn't used and it's almost all purely digital?
I think it depends how you define analog, really. I don't believe we'll ever be in a position where you can just leave a building in the hands of something digital and everything will be fine. Unless, maybe I'm not being visionary enough, but there will need to be some special robots and things, and whether that's cost effective, I don't really know. That's not in the foreseeable future. But I don't think that should let anybody, I don't think there's a reason to procrastinate. You can get started tomorrow. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be complete. And if you're kind of going to invest in a system to start, to start your digital journey, the fact that you invest in it, you will get returns. You will get energy saving returns, energy efficiencies. You will get human resource efficiencies. It doesn't mean that there's ever any sunk cost there. That's the point. That's my point. And if you decide to change systems, that's fine. I wouldn't, I would just urge anybody listening not to procrastinate. It's like, we can get started tomorrow. You know, it's not going to be perfect. That's what we're all striving for, and we will iterate and get better, but don't delay.
And do you think if you went into a business, there was the first meeting this morning was carbon net zero, and people were kind of saying they got a plan, they got a carbon plan. I don't think if we went to any organisation and said, have you got a digital plan or a plan to convert to digital, that they would have one. I don't think they have. Do you think there's a need for businesses to have a more robust plan?
It's a recommendation. I mean, if you look at any of the standards out there, any of the guidance from the Institute of Asset Management and others out there, you know, the recommendation is to have your strategic asset management plan, and in there should be digital, should be information as standard. Is that in place? No, not in many organisations. I think the reason for that is like when we're talking about some of these technologies. Let's talk about digital twins as an example, because everyone seems to be talking about that, digital twins and AI. What's the difference between digital twins is, again, coming back to, we've always looked at point solutions for digital technologies, all right, simple as that. And now we're actually bringing these all together, all these different digital platforms and mechanical devices and sensors and telemetry into one environment, one single platform. Now, the problem with that is you're actually going across different departments, yeah, cost centres. So if we go back to just something like a centralised document management system, all right, which can go into maintenance, asset management, third parties, projects, yeah, things like that, who's actually paying for that centralised system? So a lot of it actually comes down to who's actually paying to actually develop a lot of these solutions. And what I'm finding at the moment is on the projects I'm working on, it is actually the asset management teams are actually starting to implement these technologies, bring these in, and then having that further conversation, speaking to IT. And there's one we're talking to at the moment where we're turning around and said, actually, we can save on their IT budget by bringing in a cloud-based document management solution with unlimited server space. Unlimited, yeah. So they suddenly think, well, hang on, we can get rid of all of our on-premise servers, we can get rid of all the maintenance associated with that, but you're having to have that conversation between departments, yeah. Now, to do that, you need to really have an IT strategic management plan for that whole of that organisation. Now, I appreciate that's not very easy. I mean, some of these portfolios we're talking about, some of those asset portfolios out there are going to be huge, many sites, all are working independently. But to work towards that, I think, is something that every organisation, regardless of size, should actually start considering. And definitely, just go and don't try and eat the whole pie in one here or as a pizza. Do it in little parts and just say, right, we fix that. And it comes down to actually what's the problem we're trying to solve. That's the other thing is, if you're seeing an efficiency somewhere, if you're seeing we can actually change things, if you're seeing you're having to report on net zero carbon to shareholders, which is going to affect your stock price, yeah, but you need to evidence it, was a real reason to collect that data, for example. Yeah, so that's solving a problem and an issue, something the organisation requires. So I understand what the problem is, but quite often you need that plan so you can bring all these departments, different groups together. Yeah.
And I think how it's adopted, David, you said right at the start, it's a priority. There's going to be certain areas of the business, assets that can offer that benefit at a cost that is completely acceptable. There's what you're talking about, would there be some analog, some digital, some assets that benefit probably will never materialise further investment, or purely the simplicity of it. And it just doesn't make sense to stick sensors on it. And you mentioned about a blocked drain, I think you said. If the sensors are picking up, you're reliant on eyes and ears on the ground to actually go and see that. So no, I don't foresee an environment where everything is sensor digital driven. Of course, we'll move in that direction, and the benefits offered will direct you, and the priorities of compliance or cost saving or environment will drive the direction. But there's always going to be that balance. You're going to need trained engineers to go and get their hands dirty.
I think from a client side, and I've seen it in many different aspects of the public sector, is that siloing bit between estates and facilities and the digital team. Because you start competing for capital allocation, resource allocation. So you end up with an estate strategy, you end up with a digital strategy, but they're not aligned in any way, shape or form because they're completely separate. You need to start looking at how to bring that together. And I can see sort of the green shoots of that within the NHS, where historically it's been a estate strategy digital or a digital blueprint. But now they're talking about an infrastructure strategy. An infrastructure is both the estate and the digital, and trying to say bring it together. But it's again about that collaboration and making sure people are aware that you're doing it from a systems approach about the whole organisation, not trying to put the flag and go, this is the estates bit, this is the digital bit, and fighting for resource. I think that's the challenge at the moment.
The other issue also about when we talk about the analog digital discussion is also there are asset portfolios out there that are very sensitive in nature. Okay, and if there was an event, that will shut down the whole of the site. Right, it doesn't matter where that would be, sort of thing. So in some scenarios, some asset portfolios, there'll be a resonance to actually put some digital technologies within the built environment, essentially, for that reason, which adds to the complexity, shall we say?
What does digital-led maintenance mean for the engineers on the ground? I think you wanted to talk about that a little bit. It's something you felt quite passionate about.
I think fundamentally, we're talking about people, and it's ensuring that the engineer has the data to hand that they need so they can safely do the job to meet the compliance requirements, to maintain the asset as SFG20, or as the client requests, whatever the needs are for the business. But the real focus should be, when we're talking about digitalisation, is we're digitising the whole service delivery. So yes, it's collecting data, but also how does that data get to the engineer? How do they use it? What's their experience like? Because if you've got a happy engineer that can perform the tasks in the most efficient way possible, then we've got a happy client, and we can work seamlessly, friction-free, and you have a good relationship.
And I think that's very much the case. From the lowest level, the technologies to help them. It needs to make their life easier. How many times have we seen, a works ticket that says, broken light bulb in corridor, and it's a massive great corridor, and it's like, okay, let's go and it's like hunting for what is broken. Broken socket classic. It's like, can we be a bit more specific? If we can help use the data to say it's that one, they can go straight to it. If it then says, oh, and by the way, it's this type of socket, it's this type of lamp, then go, okay, well, I'll bring some spares.
Absolutely.
So actually, I have it on me because I know exactly what it's there.
Yeah.
And I've got it on the shelf because we haven't had 300 different varieties of it. We know what exactly it is. At that point, the end user, in the lowest level, will say, actually, it's making my life easier. It's better, and therefore they'll go, this is what we need to be doing.
And I think that's a key point, actually, making lives easier.
Yep.
Simple as that, the working lives easier. Going back to the BIM, 3D models and all that wonderful stuff. I mean, it's much more than that, but we go back to 3D models. And when I speak to maintenance engineers and asset managers and say, well, how are you going to use this 3D model when this is handed over at the end of this capital project? You get all sorts of answers. I've had things like, we could work out when we need to have a ladder to actually get up to the heights and all that sort of thing. But fundamentally, what it comes down to, most people just turn around and say, do you know, if I could look at a 3D model and actually work out where the pipe routes are, right, or where there's fire protection and things like that, rather than have to go and have a look at a load of drawings, find a load of drawings and try and go through drawings that are probably split into different drawings for floor plans and all that sort of thing, I want that. Now, for me, that's a really easy way to actually engage those in maintenance and asset management by bringing them into that 3D environment. Most of them are playing with PlayStations or Xboxes or whatever these days anyway, sort of thing. And then once you're actually in that 3D environment, looking at it and using it on a day-to-day basis to inform, where they're actually having to go, and they actually understand, I can locate that socket straight away and find that socket, it's in that corridor at that position. You can then start saying, well, actually, did you realise we've got all this data associated with it? We've got the serial numbers, barcodes, and all the rest of it, sort of thing. And you're bringing them into that journey in a very easy way. And I generally find, we are talking about data here, obviously, but when we talk about data in database and Excel, it's not the sexiest subject sometimes for many people, but you start bringing them into some of these 3D environments, it's an easy sell, and they can start and actually get engaged a lot easier. But it's making lives easier, essentially.
And you ultimately end up with a kind of more fulfilled fulfilled team as well. Because, I mean, the kind of negative side, not negative, but the caution is that you're going to wheedle out, as Darren was saying, so engineers who get engaged and want to know the pipework runs because they want to solve a problem will be the ones who really benefit, but they will shine. And the ones who can't really be bothered, unfortunately, that will be a lot clearer. It's a lot more transparent. But just one on that note of transparency, so like a really positive story. So typically a maintenance engineer is only called when something's wrong and you usually get shouted at, you know, and it's not particularly motivating line of communication, and your office might be a basement plant room, you know, or something like that. What happened unexpectedly for us was that one of our portfolio asset managers, who was non-technical, published a scorecard of their properties on LinkedIn and gave kudos to all of the guys who had done that in a public forum. So that ultimately, these guys are going to get more motivated. So instead of just being beaten up when something's broken, they're being credited where credit's due for good performance.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Alistair, our founder, and I were talking a few months ago about the fact that at end of year awards ceremony, it's always the sales team that win or the marketing team. When was the last time a property director or an FM director actually won an award? And I think once you start doing that, you start motivating people, and it's a career of choice, and they're going to get recognised and motivated for what they do. Another question. So there are a lot of businesses out there at the moment, SMEs, thinking, you know what, I want to adopt this strategy. I want to get more into digital-led maintenance. How would you say they should start, and how they would go about starting a digital-led maintenance strategy?
I think number one, understand their objective. Completely, why are you doing this? What your drivers? Without that, you don't know what direction to go.
So is it money, you know, bottom line? Because let's be honest, your bottom line counts. So are you saving money? Are you saving energy? Are you, you know, looking at reducing resource, or saying what's the size of the estate you actually need to deliver? Because now, you know, post-COVID, you know, hybrid working, suddenly, you know, we can actually reduce the footprints quite a lot. So it is actually being very clear on what your outcome is going to be, because you can't target it otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually absolutely changed the way we use our buildings as well, in terms of the operating hours, the occupancy rates. There's very different, especially on things like cleaning. It's a different world to pre-COVID. I think if we look at when we're talking about the blended approach, though, of taking technology and actually using it for enhancing what we already have in terms of planned schedule maintenance and things like that. If we're looking at cost savings, it has to be an opportunity to say, how do we stop putting someone in a van to do that particular task when that task doesn't need doing? And that's a very basic opportunity, and I think the standards are being evolved to actually really embrace that. So there's more than one way of fulfilling your obligations, I think, is the message going forward, and it's how technology, whether it's a sensor or all that data we have in the building management systems that's been largely unused, not necessarily untapped, but unused for many years. How do we bring that to the forefront and actually say, okay, these are the things that legislation says we have to do. We have to do this annual inspection. We have to do that. But in between, is there anything we can do with those other tasks to augment that? Mm-hmm. But then on that basis, you've also got to check the sensors. You've all got to check. So it just introduces different types of activity into your schedule.
But I think some of that bit of how do you get it started? Well, first of all, do you have the skills, the capability, the knowledge, competence within your organisation? You know, and you'll be absolutely surprised that it might not come from the areas that you expect it to. So actually, you know, start engaging with the workforce, and you might find somebody, it's their little pet hobby that they've started doing some coding, they've designed an app. You know, so look inside. If you haven't got it, then you'll need to look at, you know, a partner, a digital partner. Now, obviously, there's a cost implication, but also, you know, if you're corporate members of any of the professional bodies, you know, CIBSE, IWFM, there is huge amounts of resource and help out there and networks for you to actually go and, you know, read up or even just talk to other people that may be also on this journey, but maybe a little bit ahead of you, can give you that sort of those tips that help. What is best practice? So I think there is a lot of opportunity out there at very low cost to start looking at how you start this journey.
I look at it in a very basic way, because I'm having a conversation initially with a client. I'll just break into 4 quadrants. And the first one is absolutely, you know, what are your objectives, what's your visions, what you're trying to actually solve, all right, is the first one. Let's understand that. The second part is then looking at the processes, and you're quite right, the guidance that's out there, all right, the standards and things like that. So what process, internal policies and things you're actually having to link into, all right, and what advice can we use there? The next is the skills, maturity within the organisation, and also those third parties you work with. It's all great bringing amazing systems, all right, but if your third parties can't work with them, haven't got the maturity, then you have a problem. So you look at that first, and then finally look at the technologies. And the problem is most organisations go straight for the technology first. Mm-hmm. And if they actually think of those other 3 first and have that little, you know, that little conversation around that, I can guarantee you're starting to move yourself into looking at the right sort of technologies to solve
Yeah.
those problems, maturity, and what's right for your organisation. The only other thing is, if anyone actually wants to talk to me after this sort of thing, if you turn around and say, right, we want a digitisation, we want digital transformation, all that sort of thing, one of the key things I want to know is who are your stakeholders in your organisation?
Yeah.
Because this links back into the comments you're constantly coming back to, which is about the desperate teams where you've got project management who don't talk to asset management and things like that. So we need to understand those stakeholders and why they want that data, that information, this transformation. That's really very key to actually move things forward in
Yeah.
organisations.
On that point, I think that, I mean, I would say there is an opportunity to start with technology, because technology might be the thing that's telling you where the big opportunities are.
Oh yeah, but you're still going to work out what the problem is
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
first place
quite.
and all that.
But
You
if
go
you
through that
know,
process
if
again.
you're
Yeah.
informed, because you mentioned before about, you know, looking at net zero strategies, and a lot of net zero strategies are really a plan to make a plan. You know, it's like, we will decarbonise our buildings by finding efficiencies. Like, where, how? So why don't you go straight into making use of data that you're generating? Now, you might have a structure that you can put together pretty quickly to be able to get results, because it might just be, you know, refactoring some of the time that you've already allocated for certain tasks to do something else. You know, we recently connected to a big building, found in the order of £50,000 worth of energy savings in 3 days. That just needs a bit of reprogramming from BMS. So if they reuse some of the scheduled maintenance visits to do a little bit of reprogramming, they'll realise those savings pretty quickly. But the point is that the vast majority of people, stakeholders in buildings, are sitting on a huge mountain of data that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get it out, get it somewhere,
Yep.
get it somewhere where you can analyse it.
We've got 1 minute left, but I do have a question that's directed at one of the panel. All right, really, really quickly. So you're all in tenterhooks to see who it is. And it is for David. Yeah. And it's not rude, David. You're all right. You're okay. As a client organisation, there's often an element of push to a delivery team over setting requirements. What are your thoughts on the challenges around understanding and defining these data requirements? And that's from Lewis Cullinane.
And you know, it's a fundamental issue. So often you see, you know, and I'll use the broad term, an unintelligent client, i.e. they don't really know what they want. So they'll try and simplify it by saying, here, let's put a specification. And they'll just say, it's the whole of SFG 20. And it's like, okay, what bits of it? You know, and then it's like, what assets, you know, have you got? So part of this goes back to the point I talked about, is understanding where risk best sits. As a client, what risk, you know, do you have? I.e., it's your estate, it's your assets. What is the quality of the data that you hold on your assets? And if you're not sure of it, don't suddenly throw it over the fence to the client organisation, because you won't get the best price. You have to work with, you know, all of those parties that may be interested in saying, okay, well, we'll need to do an asset gathering exercise. That's our cost. That can't be your cost, because you don't know until we actually show you it what is all our assets. So it's look at where that risk best sits, and then have a mechanism that says there will be a bedding in period, because the asset you take on day one of a contract may not be the assets that you have. So actually have flexibility in there to say, okay, you know, we'll dispose of assets, we'll build new assets. There's going to have to be give and take. So what is the mechanism within that contract? So make sure the contract vehicle you have has flexibility that manages the risk to the appropriate party. But then it's about dialogue and conversation, saying, okay, who needs to own this? Who should take the risk? And, you know, understand that if you try and screw a contractor down on cost, it will only have one outcome. And therefore, be very clear on that.
Okay. Thank you. Right, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. There's a load of questions here that I'll try and direct to individuals later. If not, just reach out to us on LinkedIn. I'd like to thank all of you. You've done a great job. You've all participated, so thank you so much. And yeah, look forward to the next one in a couple of hours' time. So thank you.